Air Force One touched down at Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska at 3 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern Time. President George W. Bush and his team were herded into a small brick hut that gave no hint of what they would find below. 4 flights of stairs leading to an underground command center manned by a round-the-clock battle staff.
You feel like you're playing a part in a movie, actually.
This is the U.S. Strategic Command Underground Command Center. It was built to transmit a president's order to go to nuclear war. When Mr. Bush walked in, the battle staff was watching the skies over the United States. After a short briefing, Mr. Bush and Chief of Staff Card were taken to a teleconference center for a meeting of his National Security Council back in Washington. Mr. Bush had a question for his CIA director, George Tenet.
George Tenet was asked, who do you think assessment, but it looks like, it feels like, it smells like Al-Qaeda.
FBI Director Robert Mueller says there was an essential clue that came from one of the hijacked planes before it crashed.
There was a flight
from the Oval Office. The Secret Service insisted that Washington still wasn't safe, but by then, Mr. Bush had had enough.
He looks at us.
I also wanted to get back to convene the national security team. We had convened them by video conference, and that's fine. But I wanted to see me and see my body language and feel what I felt, because I had something to tell them. And I wanted to make it absolutely clear that we're at war, that we were going to set new doctrine, and that we're going to win the war, and we were going to lead this country. And I couldn't wait to get back. I also wanted to see Laura.
At 4:36 that afternoon, he finally headed home.
I had time to think, and a couple of thoughts emerged. One was that you're guilty if you harbor a terrorist, because I knew these terrorists, like Al-Qaeda, like to prey on weak government and weak people. The other thought that came was the opportunity to fashion a vast coalition of countries that would either be with us or with the terrorists.
Even in those early hours on Air Force One, you were looking out on a world that was suddenly pretty black and white to you. You're either with us or against us.
That's right. I felt that way.
While the president's plane sped east, the last casualty of the attack on America collapsed. World Trade Center number 7. 47 stories turned to dust in the street. As one of the nation's most tragic days turned into evening, it was feared that as many as 10,000 people had died. The true death toll came months later. At the World Trade Center, 2,797 were killed. At the Pentagon, 184, and in Pennsylvania, 40. Altogether, there were 3,021 dead. But in the early evening of September 11th, as military jets patrolled the skies over New York and Washington, no one knew whether or where terror would strike next. As Air Force One flew home through the darkening skies of September 11th, Washington, D.C. was reeling from the attacks. Across the Potomac River from the Capitol, the Pentagon was still burning 8.5 hours after American Flight 77 disintegrated into its walls. Marine Major Damian Marsh co-pilot of the president's helicopter, Marine One, was stationed nearby throughout the day.
There was little charred pieces of paper and smoke from the Pentagon land.
Travis Bowes is Marine One's crew chief.
It was my job to just make sure that that plane was ready to go all day long.
Bowes and Marsh were waiting for the president when he stepped off Air Force One at 6:30.
From the time the president stepped off Air Force One and came down the steps and started walking towards us, all I could think of is, this is truly a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. I mean, despite of everything going on, he slowed down, saluted the crew chief, boarded the aircraft, and then came up and came up in the cockpit. And normally he would shake hands and say hello, ask about the weather. He just grabbed us on the shoulders and, come on boys, we gotta go. We gotta get back to the White House now.
It was near dusk as the helicopter lifted off, surrounded by security.
Two of our Blackhawks were low in front of us. Then you had the flight of H-3s, and we had, as we hit the Washington Monument, we turned the helicopter and we landed. He still came up and thanked us for the safe flight in, and stepped off the steps and into history.
9 hours after the attacks, Mr. Bush arrived back at the White House. Was there a time that you were afraid there would not be a White House to return to?
I don't remember thinking about whether or not the White House would have been obliterated. I think I might have thought they took their best shot, and now it's time for ours to take our best shot.
As the president went to work inside the executive offices, members of the House and Senate were gathering on the Capitol steps to address the nation.
We are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened.
Just off the Oval Office, Mr. Bush added the words that would become known as the Bush Doctrine. No distinction between terrorists and those who harbor them.
The president had basically said to them, I'm tired of hearing threat after threat after threat. I want a comprehensive strategy. I want to think through, a comprehensive way to deal. The terror network was basically a parasite.
American people wanted to hear it that night.
I told him I didn't want to talk about war in the speech. This was a speech of healing. It wasn't a declaration of war. There's plenty of time to declare our intentions, that I wanted to comfort the country. And so the speech was an attempt to do that. And the next day I started talking about war.
The president spoke to the nation from the same desk where Franklin Roosevelt first heard the news of Pearl Harbor. Now he was commander-in-chief. 80 million Americans were watching.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
The Oval Office speech came at the end of the bloodiest day in American history since the Civil War. Mr. Bush walked to the residence for the night, but the fear of terror continued. At 11:30, a Secret Service agent rushed the president and the First Lady down to the White House bunker. They were tracking an unidentified plane. It turned out to be one of ours, now protecting Washington. In the early morning hours of September the 12th, the president finally slept. September 11th had been the worst day of George W. Bush's presidency. The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center destroyed. The Pentagon attacked. Air Force One, where he spent most of the day, covered by a fighter escort. At the time, Mr. Bush had been president for less than 8 months, and he had never been tested as commander-in-chief. No one in the White House or at the Pentagon could be sure of what he would do.
I think they're all probably taking a step back and saying, is this guy going to lead us? I never asked them what they thought, because I knew what I was going to do. I knew exactly what had to be done, Scott. And that was to set a strategy to seek justice, find out who did it, hunt them down, and bring them to justice.
By September the 12th, the commander-in-chief was on active duty.
I remember going in for our morning meeting that I have with him, And I was all worried about the first time he'd see the press, and there was going to be a cabinet meeting, and we needed to have a statement, and he stopped me.
Then, the president made clear to the American people what was next.
The deliberate and deadly attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war. The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This is an enemy that tries to hide, but it won't be able to hide forever. The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination. This battle will take time and resolve, but make no mistake about it, we will win.
Mr. Bush gathered his war cabinet to talk about who
Osama bin Laden had launched the attack on the USS Cole in 2000, and at the East African embassies in 1998. As we looked at those events on the 11th and then on the 12th, it increasingly looked to us like this had been such an attack.
It wasn't a total surprise. National Security Advisor Rice says the administration had been at work on a plan to strike bin Laden's organization well before September 11th. I understand that plan was moving along